Hello, my name is Brian Berry, and this is The Power of One. This is a show that shows you that one person can make a difference and that people in our community are doing amazing things every day in a variety of fields and genres. Today, we're very, very lucky to have Daniel Torres, who works at the Flintridge Center here in Pasadena. We're going to find out a little bit more what his title is and what he's been up to the last couple of years. So Daniel, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Brian.
So could you describe what your role is at the Flintridge Center, what you do, and how you do it?
Yeah. So my title at the Flintridge Center is Strategic Partnership Specialist. Now, that doesn't necessarily describe what I do on a day-to-day basis, but my key functions there are instructing our pre-apprenticeship class for community members who are returning home from incarceration, and providing case management, job development training, and also building relationships with people that can provide opportunities for people coming through our program.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about how you got there. What was your process? You know, I think a lot of people who have either worked with the Flintridge Center or have received their services, they all have a story. So,
right.
So what is your story?
So my story is not unique for people that are returning home from incarceration, but so when I was 2 months old, my father struggled with incarceration. He was incarcerated for 20 years. My mom really struggled to raise me, my brother, and my little sister. Being a single mother and trying to figure out ways to provide for our family, which ultimately kind of led me to dysfunctional behaviors. At 13, I was incarcerated for the first time. And between 13 and 18, I would go in and out of juvenile halls and group homes, where I picked up a lot of other dysfunctional behaviors.
Right.
And at 19, I was convicted of my first felony. And I had my 2 daughters, and I was just trying to figure out how can I provide. And one thing I knew is that I was at a fork in the road, and I didn't want to make the same mistakes that had happened to me. So that's what kind of led me to the Flintridge Center to participate in the services that they provide there.
Yeah, a couple things. One is I think a lot of people in society just assume that there are good people and bad people.
Right.
And they place it in a context where if you've transgressed in some way, or if you've committed a crime, you must be a part of the bad people.
Right.
But from your experience, you know, it's not that simple. It's not that, you know, I think that there's always a cause for people to make the decisions that they make. What has your experience been, not only your own life, but with the people you've worked with?
So I've been at the Flintridge Center for over 4 years now, and one thing that continues to show itself as a key influencer on what makes people make decisions that they make is childhood conditioning. Yeah. So the things I learned at home is ultimately how I make my decisions as an adult, until I take the time to learn and process the things that I learned as a child and address them to learn healthier behaviors. So childhood conditioning is a huge thing. The way I grew up, this is all I knew. Foul language, a bunch of kids that are displaced and not wanted by society, or parents not able to take care of them. And it's just a challenging thing.
Yeah, and that goes directly to what a lot of people talk about between nature and nurture. So right. Some people say, well, it was his nature, you know, he was a bad seed. Again, in my experience, the people who have acted out, say, back when I was in elementary school, there was some sort of abuse, or there was trauma that caused that. So I really feel as though it's this whole notion of nurturing. And so how do we break the cycle of that sort of environment? How do we change the context?
One of the worst feelings for me, Brian, was not feeling accepted anywhere I went, right? And as society, when I had a criminal record now, I was not accepted where other people were. And what does that mean is that I have access to less opportunities. And it's just a horrible feeling for any human. Anybody can relate to feeling unwanted or not a part of something that they wanted to be a part of. that's a relatable thing. Trauma is a real thing, and it affects not just the formerly incarcerated population, but community members overall. And the thing is that there's so much research behind the way that growing up in a traumatic environment impacts the development, the actual physical development of the brain, which causes people to be spontaneous and kind of that fight, flight, and freeze response system. It's a survival mechanism that every human has. So I think as we're able to educate community members and other groups of the effects of trauma and the reality of it, we'll be able to start healing as a community.
Yeah, the unfortunate part that you talked about is this whole classification or demeaning of certain people in society. So if you treat them as though they are less than, the key term is dehumanize them, then you can do whatever you want to them. So I'm always looking at ways in which we can change people's hearts and minds about that and say, one, people can change, and they do it all the time. And two, whatever happened to this notion of forgiveness and giving people a second chance? What are your thoughts about how we can help people to be more forgiving?
I think it's a process. I think everything in life is a process. There's no magic wand, there's no secret formula to it. There's victims of crimes that have every right to be hurt or feel like they don't want to forgive perpetrators of crime. But the reality is that I have 3 children, and when they make a mistake, I don't wake up every morning and spank them and make them stand in the corner. I don't do that every day because she ate 1 too many candy bars than she was supposed to, my daughter. And the reality is that society puts these bars around people even when they return home. And it's a lifelong punishment that says you are not one of us and you are not a member of this community. And if you get out of line, you're going back.
And I'm really glad you used the comparison of a parent. Because I know of no parent, and I've talked to groups about this many times, who would punish their child week after week, month after month. There is a set time for that punishment, and then you get to start all over. So I always get frustrated with society and not doing that. So let's talk a little bit more deeply about what are the barriers. So let's say you've been incarcerated for a little while. What are the barriers when you get out? What are the challenges that you face?
So for me specifically, and I see this often with the community members that we work with at the Flint Ridge Center, but for me specifically, I was coming home and I spent a while away from my family. Now, while I'm away from my family, my wife is picking up the responsibilities of taking care of my family. And we're a team, so I've been out of the picture for a while. And so when I get home, she kind of has this expectation that I better get right to it as soon as possible and start supporting her. Yeah. And with every well-intended feeling that I have, and that's what I want to do, when I go out to pursue an opportunity to be able to bring food to the table, to pay the rent, to get health benefits from my family, I'm denied the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the most depressing things in the world to want to be able to provide for, when I wanted to be able to provide for my family, but I was denied the opportunity to.
Yeah, especially if you've served your time and you feel like, okay, I served the obligation that I had to society. I paid that back, so I'm ready to go, and I don't want to go back to what I was doing before. Right. But I'm being pressured I'm not being given the opportunities that other people are being given. So how do you deal with those frustrations? And not you specifically necessarily, but how does someone in that situation deal with those pressures? Unfortunately,
what tends to happen a lot is people give up, right?
Yeah.
So our job at the Flint Ridge Center is how do we develop a system, a support system where people are educated about the support that's at the center. And the thing is one way that we do this is we have group therapy. We don't call it group therapy, we call it life skills, and it's on Monday nights at 6 p.m. And our partner organization, Second Call, provides this service at the Flint Ridge Center. What it is, it's an emotionally safe place where people are dealing with day-to-day life, not just formerly incarcerated people, can come and talk about things that are going on as an outlet, as a safe outlet, instead of resorting back to dysfunctional behaviors.
Yeah, so you build a network. You build a
Absolutely.
group of people who are supporting one another while you're going through these challenges. One of the other issues, I think, even for the individual, is stigma. So the stigma of, and when you say group therapy, the stigma of the psychological or emotional damage, I don't need a therapist, I'm fine. How do you convince someone to participate in that process when they're maybe a little bit hesitant to say, yeah, I'm depressed, or I'm upset, or I have anger issues? How do you get them to come?
So as a leader, I can't take anybody where I haven't been. And one of the key strategies there is, and it's kind of, in the professional field, they say not to self-disclose or use very minimal self-disclosure when working with community members for whatever reasons. But I find that when I self-disclose and say, hey, check it out, you're not on an island by yourself dealing with these situations, these circumstances, and these obstacles by yourself. I'm not on that island with you, and I'm not here as a service provider, and I don't have the answers to help you. I'm a client first. So that seems to work.
Yeah, so creating those bonds of sort of a balance of, I'm not greater than you, I'm not here telling you what to do, but I've been in your situation as well. There's authenticity there and credibility, right?
Absolutely. And it builds rapport and builds strong relationships and allows people the space to feel like they can be vulnerable and talk about some things that are frowned upon in society.
Well, yeah, there has to be that trust built before you can go into those deep spaces. So talk a little bit about what are the options for individuals as far as employment once they're out, because it's so, especially if you have kind of that F on your forehead, it's limited. So how do you get around that?
So the reason I went to the Flint Ridge Center was for the Apprenticeship Preparation Program. And actually, Brian, who's interviewing me right now, is actually was a supervisor there and helped build and establish some of the relationships that we build on today. So union construction has always been our number one, kind of our marquee program. And the reason is because when we researched other fields in other industries, no other industry was as accepting to people with felonies on their background as union construction. They wanted to know three things. Can someone stay drug-free? Can they have a teachable spirit? And can they show up early? And if they said yes to all those questions, then they're welcome as long as they meet and pass the testing requirements. So union construction is it.
Yeah, and because I think a lot of viewers are not aware of that. So felony friendly means that they'll allow someone, even though they have a record, they'll hire them. And I agree with you that's exactly the strategy that was implemented there. What is then the process for them? Because I think that the education piece is really important, but then getting into the unions is a challenge as well. Yeah. So how does that work?
So we start off by having community members come in and meet with our case managers at Flint Ridge Center. Through that process, there's an assessment that's done where we're able to identify the resources or the obstacles that any individual has and start developing a plan to help remove some of these barriers. It could be anything from transportation, housing, child support services. It could be suspended license or tickets, domestic violence, substance use. The list goes on and on. So we've developed relationships with partners all over Pasadena that provide these services that we can make referrals to. That's kind of the first step. Let's get an individual, man or a woman, on solid ground so that they could start focusing on what it takes to actually get into a union construction career.
So it's kind of an analysis of what their issues are or their needs are,
Yes.
and then placing them on a pathway toward resolving those.
Right.
And then, so for the apprenticeship program, then how does that does that get them into a union?
So the apprenticeship program is 240 hours. It's 120 hours of the union multi-craft core curriculum, and that's blueprint reading, construction math, safety, OSHA 10, CPR. And the reason those are important, because those are all state certificates that help an individual coming into a trade have a leg up from the next regular community member who comes in without those practices. But on top of that 120 hours, we had another 120 hours of real personal development things. So there's a lot of people that apply to unions. So how the idea
it's
then
very
is
competitive.
it's extremely competitive, and only the sharks stay working. The goldfish end up on the unemployment list, right? So how do we train our students to become sharks? And we do that by teaching them how to interview extremely well, prepare them physically. We go to the CATS Performance Center here in Pasadena twice a week to do physical training, which is also a trauma therapy. So we get like two birds for one stone there.
Yeah.
They don't know it, but they're building.
No, absolutely. Get them out physical, and that helps with the psychological as well.
Yeah, and they're building a bond. They encourage each other. It becomes a unit, and it's awesome to watch that grow week over week. We also do the life skills, the dysfunctional families trauma-informed care sessions with Second Call. That's 20 hours of that.
Right.
And those are really, like we talked about earlier, it allows people an emotionally safe place where they can feel vulnerable and talk about things and not feel like they're alone on an island with their circumstances.
So let's go back to that, your analogy with being a parent. What ends up happening, I think, society doesn't have a whole lot of patience for people, well, even some families too, for people who, what they call fail over and over again. So what has been your experience? So someone goes through the program, but then they fall back. They hit a bump in the road, and they either are reincarcerated or maybe they start using again. How do you, what's your patience with that, first of all? And then how do you get them back on track?
So it happens. Just because people come to Flint Ridge don't mean that they just get tapped in the head and all of a sudden they're ready.
Yeah, magically.
Yeah, magically just trot off into the sunset. The thing is that we don't give up on people. We never close the door on anyone. But my frustration is not so much with the individual, but more when the individual is trying to kind of give me excuses. So I tell them when they're ready, please, and they know where to come when they're ready. Yeah. Oftentimes we get students that come, they disappear for a year, and they'll pop back up and say, you know what, I'm tired, Daniel. Let's see if I can get back on the horse and do this the right way.
Yeah. So it's having an open door policy, and it's being patient. Because I think what happens too is families kind of get burned out. So it's good to have an intermediary or a nonprofit organization that's doing that. I know, for example, some people, they'll go through the process, they'll fall, and the family says, you can't come back because we've been burned too many times. So having your support structure can be really valuable. How do you help families to assist people who have challenges? So
getting back to where I learned my dysfunctional behaviors is early childhood conditioning.
Yeah.
So sometimes the healthiest thing for an individual is to kind of get away from their family as well. So there are families that are involved who feel like they are doing the right things because they can show up to work every day, but are very, very verbally and mentally abusive to some of the community members. There's a whole shame that comes with, in certain religions and different things, say, got a son who has tattoos on his face now, but I'm a prominent member of some church or something like that, and sit in the back seat, duck, if my church members are coming around. So there's this whole kind of unintended consequence of trying to people please, right?
Right.
And so community members are dealing with that as they go home. Mm-hmm. So the emotionally safe place is not home. So what do we do when that happens? That's why we try to build that at Flint Ridge Center until that person can see. We do work with families too. I get mothers who bring their children in, and I say, listen, you're going to have to wait outside because if he wants to do it, I'm ready, but you can't do it for him. So one of the worst things I see is parents just trying to find an answer for what's going on with their children and but the child's not ready, or and I say child, but I mean young man or young woman.
Right.
They're just not ready for it. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, but that's why organizations like the Flint Ridge Center or Homeboy Industries, for example, are critical, I think, in this healing process.
It's absolutely all about healing. That's it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about policy. So one of the areas that has been challenging for people who are incarcerated is the level of, and for many people like Michelle Alexander, it's called mass incarceration. So the extreme numbers of people who have been placed in jail and prison, especially over the last 20 to 30 years because of the drug war. There's been a shift in that. So how have Prop 47, Prop 57, and then AB 109, how have they impacted your work, and then also folks in this part of the community, the people who are coming out of jail and prison?
I'm just grateful for Prop 47, 57, and AB 109. I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it was fully thought out what some of the unintended impacts are going to be of Prop 47, 57, and AB 109, but I love it because it removes some of the barriers from people. We were talking about punishing our children for their entire life. So now there's some qualifying felonies that are real, kind of petty, that have been reclassified now as misdemeanors. So one of the things we do at Flint Ridge is we have a group of volunteer attorneys who comes in. We provide free life scans for any community member that qualifies under Prop 47. And they will sit down with the volunteer attorneys, assess their Department of Justice background check, and remove some of those felonies and reduce them down to misdemeanor and then expunge them.
I have to say, I'm so glad to hear you say that you're thankful or grateful for Prop 47, 57, because it's interesting, sometimes in law enforcement circles, there are statements made that, burglaries are up or robberies are up or, some of these petty crimes. The other comment I hear all the time is, oh yeah, well we could detain them before. We used to be able to, get them for that, but now we just have to let them go for whatever the offense was. So I think that the narrative needs to people need to hear that there are actually value from these.
Yeah.
So how do we inform people a little bit better?
So I've heard many police chiefs and different people in law enforcement. We all know mass incarceration doesn't work. We know that we cannot arrest ourselves out of these circumstances or issues that we're facing today. And the reality is that today we are living with the consequences of arresting every single person that did anything wrong for the last 20 or 30 years. So what we can do is we can work together with law enforcement to put together strategic plans how to best assist community members that are getting out under Prop 47, 57, AB 109, and put together a system so that as they are returning back into whatever community that they're going, there's a place to touch down, check in, see what resources are available to help start the process of reintegration successfully.
Yeah, I've thought at various times that police budgets are generally the largest budget in a city's portfolio, shall we, or in the departments. I've always thought that since that's where most of the money goes, one way of improving public safety would be to invest some of that money into reintegration services. Do you think that that's a viable possibility, that every department in the state allocate a certain percentage to that?
I think it's great. I think it's a great idea, and I just hope that is accepted or even given some thought through every police department across the state. Here in Pasadena, we're very lucky to have a supportive police department, and our police chief, Philip Sanchez, has seen the work that we do and understands the value in it. So And we actually did a Prop 47 proposal with the city of Pasadena.
Oh, right.
The
Yeah, it was
Pasadena Police
combination.
Department and the Pasadena Mental Health Department, Public Health Department.
Right, right. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I was wondering, just to kind of wrap up or summarize, what would you like to leave people with? Again, there's this whole notion of forgiveness and giving second chances that our society seems to be more about punishment. You've seen so many people change their lives, and you've seen given that second chance, or maybe third chance, that they actually recapture what they were intended to be. How do we share that message even more broadly and get more people to be on board with it?
I would just say the news channels and movies and things don't do people with a criminal background any justice. There's a lot of monsterizing, there's a lot of fear pumped into local communities, and misinformation out there about people. But the reality is we are people too. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm a son. I'm also a community leader, and I work with people in the community. I'm not a monster. And there's a lot of people in the community that have this potential, but are lacking in opportunity. The thing about people that have a background and have been kind of chastised from any opportunities in our society is that when they are given a meaningful opportunity, they run with it because they know what it's like to feel like they cannot provide for their families. So you mean to tell me that this is the first time somebody is saying, come on, welcome, here's an opportunity to change your life? People run with that opportunity.
Yeah, they take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today. This was fantastic. I wish we could talk a little bit longer, but thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing at the
Thank you,
Flint Ridge
Brian.
Center.
I really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, it was great to have you here.
Thanks.